Well, viewers, as you'll know from many previous podcasts, the question that continues to be asked by myself is wrapped up in three simple words: what matters most? Because I think it's just too easy to kind of say, we live in a polarized world, there's darkness, there's challenges. I mean, of course, that is very prevalent. But I think, irrespective of where our energy sits in this modern day world, I think those three words can give us a lot of peace. And so, to help unravel that question, I'm absolutely delighted to invite back Richard Gerver, somebody, as I've said previously on more than one occasion, I class as a friend, a trusted mentor, a guide, and a world authority. I think it's fair to say on the in the world of change. So, Richard, a bit of a long-winded way of saying, nice to see you again, my friend.
Oh, it's great to be back, Paul. Good to see you.
So, having just put the world to rights over the World Cup, and we won't delve into that, what matters most, Richard? You and I have spoken many, many, many times about, the world challenges collectively, what we, experience as challenges as individuals. So, is there the proverbial silver bullet? I know you're massive on sort of, um, the granular, not the grandiose. Can we distill this down to an answer or a set of answers to say, but this is what really matters most?
That's a good question. I mean, for me, and I don't know about you, Paul, and for those people watching or listening, as we get older, I become more and more obsessed with personal legacy. Like what will be said of me when my day comes. And I think for me, I've always believed this, and I think it's crystallizing more and more, that what matters most on an individual basis for me is that I leave the world a better place than I found it. And I don't mean that in grandiose terms. I mean that in granular, in my orbit, the people I came into contact with, the relationships I had, family, friends, colleagues, that somehow I leave the place a kinder, better, happier place than I found it. I mean, there's a book which I find hugely inspirational when I think about this stuff, written by a woman called Bronnie Ware, and I don't know if you've ever come across it. Bronnie is Australian, was a palliative care nurse, and she wrote a book called Five Regrets Before Dying. And it was based on the conversations she had with the thousands of people that she sat next to at their bedside as they drew their final breaths. And I've written them down because the five I think are beautiful but sad in hindsight, and I think they're the things that we should all, maybe we can base our conversation around. So the first of the five regrets is that I wish I'd had the courage to live a life true to myself, not the life that others expected of me. Now, I think that's fascinating because and again, we can come back to this, but I don't know about you. I have met so many people through my life, particularly in my professional existence, where people on the surface look to be successful, look to be doing the right things, have a great salary, good pension, super car, nice home, good holidays. And the number of those people that say, you know what, I'm ultimately dissatisfied because I'm trapped in this life, but it's not the life I actually wanted. I did this because it's what my parents expected of me, what my peers expected of me, and my friends expected of me. The second, which I think is incredibly powerful, because I think it speaks to the guilt we're all made to feel about our existence, particularly through our adulthood, based often actually from how we're educated. And I wish I hadn't worked so hard. And I think of that on a very personal level again with my grandfather, my mother's father, who had the kind of mindset of an immigrant who worked so hard, 18, 20-hour days, 7 days a week, to build something for his family. And when he died, he'd never actually enjoyed any of the benefits himself. He'd spent his entire life working, and when he wasn't working, feeling guilty that he should be working. The third one I think is really pertinent today, and particularly around men's health, I think. And that is, I wish I'd had the courage to express my feelings. I mean, that's a humdinger. And again, I was talking to somebody just this morning, actually, who said that his wife was raised to believe that she should never cry because crying is a sign of weakness. And I just think that's a huge issue to talk about. The next one, I look at myself and feel stabs of regret over this. I wish I'd stayed in touch with my friends. The people we love and lose along the way, from our school days. Now, I know there are some people out there that are still in touch with the friends they made at primary school. My son is one, no matter where he travels in the world and what he does, his best friends are still the kids he met on his first day at nursery school when he was 3 years old. I've lost touch with so many of the people that mattered to me through my life. And for a whole mix of reasons we may come on to. And then the final one, which I think is really poignant, is I wish I'd let myself be happier, which I think is a huge thought and idea. And so much of what you said in your introduction, I think, orbits around the idea of what does that mean, and why do we stop ourselves, and what does happier and happiness mean anyway? So anyway, there's my starter for 5, Paul.
Wow. I think we could do an in-depth podcast series just on each one of those 5 individually.
Absolutely.
Yeah, let's start with the first one, Richard. True to self.
Yeah.
I really smiled at that one because my five L's values are life, learning, loving, legacy, and loyalty. And the last one is, the old Shakespearean quote: in all that process, to thine own self be true.
Yeah, absolutely.
Um, because certainly as I look back on my own life, Richard, and I think it's a trait of human nature, the risk of generalizing too much, that, this people pleasing, call it what you will, this need for external validation, etc., etc. I think I don't want to generalize too much, but collectively, it's something we all go through at some stage in our life. I don't think I've certainly not met anybody that's been totally autonomous in terms of, I don't care what you think, say, or do about me, because this is me, this is my life, etc., etc. But I do think there's a place you reach where you can be respectful of other people's thoughts, feelings, and opinions, but ultimately, you align with people, maybe philosophically, but certainly energetically, that are, like attracts like, so to speak. And I think it's those people, Richard, that really do help to shape us. You
Yeah.
alluded to it in the last podcast we did, in the previous podcast, where, as a result of this podcast or conversation or meeting, our lives won't be the same because we will reflect on the value of what that person said.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely true. We change and grow every single day, whether we realize it or not, based on every single experience and interaction we have. Something changes in our brain and our reaction to our internal and external worlds. And to your point, I think it's really interesting because I often say to people, I don't think I was able to look myself in the mirror and be happy with who I was until I was probably in my mid-30s. Now, I know I've spoken to some people for whom they still well into their 50s, 60s, 70s who still don't feel that way. But I feel very lucky because for a whole range of reasons, I was able to look at myself in the mirror in my 30s and go, I'm happy with who I am. But so much of the projection of who I was trying to be came from my lived experience on a daily basis, whether it was family response to who I was, what they expected me to be, as we've already kind of touched on, whether it was the interactions I had, the professional masks I wore, the person I was trying to be growing up, particularly when you hit those difficult hormonal years as a teenager, the kind of person you want to be in the eyes of you know, the people you want to date or go out with, the people you want to be friends with. You know, I did daft stuff as a teenager, not horrendous, but daft. You know, I smoked because I wanted to be in with the in crowd. So I smoked cigarettes, hated it, but did it. You know, I took you know, I smoked cannabis and stuff like that, not because I wanted to, because I did. I drank too much on occasion because I was with people who, like, you know, who got drunk and stuff. I tried to straighten my hair because in those days, and I know for people watching, it'll be hard for people to believe, my hair used to grow up like a microphone, very naturally curly and fuzzy. I hated it. And some of my friends used to take the mickey, so I used to straighten it using wax and God knows what. And it's probably why how I treated my hair younger is probably why I have absolutely no hair now. You know, I wore big thick glasses as a child, which I was teased for. And it's, you know, although I wear contact lenses some of the time now, it's why it took me years before I was happy to wear my glasses in public as an adult, you know. And so many of those things, I think, are the things that are projected on us that we feel we have to juggle. And I think it's a very wonderful moment, and possibly because of love, possibly because of self-confidence, you wake up one day and you go, actually, you know what? This is who I am. I'm comfortable with who I am. I'm happy with who I am. And I need to have the confidence to believe people will accept me and take me for who I am.
Yeah, and that's key, isn't it? So I don't really want to go through this in kind of order that you've mentioned them, Richard, if I may. And this is obviously very subjective, but I want to home in on the third one because I think this is absolutely monumental for us as human beings. Courage to express feelings. I mean,
Yeah.
that's such a big one, isn't it? Particularly for the masculine energy. And
Mm.
you alluded to it there, Richard, you know, with the phraseology that I coined, big boys don't cry. And I can certainly testify to that. And when that came out, you know, a couple of decades later from that traumatic child, boy, did it come out.
Yeah. And again, you know, I think that's true. And for you in particular, for so many reasons in your life. But, you know, being involved, for example, in elite professional sport is one of those areas where that projection of toughness and that somehow showing your emotions or being honest with your emotions is a sign of weakness. And
Yeah.
so particularly for boys, I think particularly for boys brought up in traditional homes, traditional backgrounds, often more challenging backgrounds. You know, the idea that you can show emotion is a bad thing. It is seen as a weakness. And as I say, you know, it was interesting coming across a woman today who said the same thing, that her father in particular, male energy, had said, I never want to see you cry.
Mm.
And actually, I was very lucky being brought up, because I was brought up by a remarkably amazing mother, woman, strong woman, who encouraged me to show my emotions, to be expressive, to laugh, to smile, to cry. And so I've grown up, you know, and again, as I get older, I cry at the daftest things now. You know, I can be on an aeroplane watching a movie and the cabin crew will come up to me because I'll be watching even a bloody rom-com, right? And my tears will be streaming down my face. And I've had aircrew come up to me and say, "You all right, sir?" You know, we were talking before we came on. It was my daughter's wedding a year ago today, on the day we're recording this. And I described to people, I saw the whole thing through kind of soft focus because I had tears in my eyes the whole day. And I think it's a really interesting thing because so many people, and particularly in high performing backgrounds, or where the expectation of them is high performing in whatever way you know, you define that, this idea that somehow to show emotion is weakness is such a crazy situation and such a damaging situation for human beings to believe. You know, we are emotional. Human beings are emotional. It's part of what makes us human beings. And I think that to deny that of ourselves only causes problems and stores up massive problems for people as they go through life's adventure, challenge, and adversity.
Because when you look at it maybe oversimplistically, Richard. It's energy. It's energy, isn't it? And if you suppress that energy, I think it's like everything else. You can get so many kind of pickled onions in a jar, but sooner or later the jar's going to be full, and it's going to say sorry, not anymore, not on my
Yeah.
watch.
And unfortunately, that is the pressure cooker scenario. Eventually,
Mm.
it has to come out, and it can come out in, as you know better than most, right? It can come out in such a variety of ways, many of which are not positive because it's like a volcanic eruption. Um, I, as an educator, I saw so many children who were swallowing back their emotions for all kinds of reasons, mainly a lack of personal confidence, a lack of belief of who. It goes back to our first thing we were talking about, a lack of belief of who they were, comfort in their own skin, having to project or be something for somebody else. Children experiencing abuse in a domestic environment who have to swallow those emotions just to protect themselves, right the way through, to the young people whose parents at the other end are so hyper controlling about their education, their future, what they're going to be, that they need to come top of their class, etc., etc. And at no time do those people feel they can show their emotional response or their truth or their honesty. So I definitely think it's damaging, and I think it's tied to that first thing about having the confidence to be yourself. Some people aren't emotional, and that's fine. And if that comes from within and honesty, that's fine. But most of us are deeply emotive creatures.
Mm. Yeah, ain't that the truth? Um, let self be happy, Richard. Let self be happy. I want to quote a line from I can't remember. Wasn't Otis Redding? Happiness is just an illusion.
Yeah, yeah. I think it's yeah. I know who you mean. I know the song. In fact, I can hear it in my head, but I'm not going to sing it for people here because we want people to stay with us.
But I mean, is it, Richard? You can sort of look philosophically about the relationship between joy and happiness, and I've heard it said that happiness is like motivation. It's superficial. It's short-lived. It's like taking a nice warm shower on a cold day. You feel great, and I drew, rightly or wrongly, a parallel to kind of the old gym situation, New Year's Eve. Oh, I'm going to stop smoking. I'm going to join the gym. I'm going to lose weight. Da, 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 da. Well, okay, you're motivated to do that. But this, for me, Richard, brings in the relationship between motivation and inspiration. The latter being where we go down into the C drive of our psyche and say, yeah, but why? Why do you really want to do that? Other than, as I say, this superficial, well, my mates are doing it, or, it's the thing to do, all the things that you've kind of alluded to previously. Any thoughts on that?
I think, again, I think it's a really interesting and complex issue. Happiness, for me, is a natural state, a natural emotion. But we can't live in a constant state of happiness. I personally believe that you identify moments of happiness and joy sometimes because of the lived adversity. There's no such thing as people that just go through life smiling at everything and feeling positive. And I think often we put pressure on ourselves and to be so. And what worries me, there's a significant movement out there around the world, the happiness movement, the kind of positive psychology stuff. And I get some of it, but I think it's been misused by many to make people feel guilty because they don't feel happy all the time, and they do feel stress and angst and anger and all of those emotions and despair. And all of those things are part of the palette of what it is to be a human being. So I don't think we should be searching for happiness because I'm not sure that's necessarily the way to be. I think we should be cognizant of those moments in our lives and celebrate for them. We all have, one of the great paradoxes, for example, of falling in love or having children or having deep emotional connections with people is tragically those things will never end happily because they always end in loss. They end with somebody passing away or moving on, or a relationship coming to an end. And the hard truth is that that's the yin and yang of human existence, right? We know when we choose, if we're lucky enough to have a life partner, that one day that relationship will end in sheer pain because one of you will lose the other. And I think that's true even at a micro level of moments of happiness and moments of sadness. But I think the thing is to learn to live that moment in the moment, to enjoy that moment for what it is, enjoy even the fleeting moments of happiness, to be able to find them, not to feel guilty about them, because again, I know one of the human reflexes for some people is to not allow yourselves to feel happy for a moment because of the complexity that surrounds you. So it's like, oh, I have no right to feel happy in this moment. I have no right to, you've got a beautiful sunset behind you, right? You've got no right to look at the sunset and for it to bring you joy because I'm miserable or I'm dealing with some real tough stuff in I have no right to feel happy. And that's not true either. But I think the myth that somehow we can construct a life that makes us feel positive 99% of the time is frankly a fallacy. And I do believe that the moments of pain also are the moments that allow us to identify and enjoy the moments of happiness, however fleeting. But we mustn't stop ourselves from doing so, and we mustn't believe that happiness is somehow a gift for the rare few, and I should feel guilty if I don't feel happy, and I should feel guilty if I feel sad. I think that stuff is deeply, deeply damaging.
Yeah. I think there's something, is there not, in the old football cliche, don't get too high when you win and don't get too low when you lose. And what that speaks to me, Richard, is okay, so where do we, based on our own personal experiences, journey, more importantly, story, where is that bar set?
I think I think it's an interesting question. The football analogy is a really interesting one, right? Because I'm an Arsenal supporter. So, for 22 years, we watched other teams win the Premier League title. And this year, for the first time in 2 decades, Arsenal were Premier League champions. But as we speak now, we're only 2 or 3 weeks away from the new Football League season. Now, the joy and misery of being a football fan is that every season there's a reset and you come into that season with optimism and fresh hope, right? So I know Arsenal are coming into this season as Premier League champions. The likelihood of us winning the title again next season, or possibly even for the next 5, 10, 15 seasons, well, who knows? But you know what? On the day Arsenal were declared champions, I was full of joy. I phoned my son who lives in Australia. We had a virtual beer together. We talked about all the years we'd been to games and had near misses or moments of sadness or misery or, things didn't go our way. And then we said, you know what? It's great for now. But the minute the new season kicks off in August, we all start again. Everyone resets and who knows where we'll be. And there's no point saying, oh, but I'm miserable because it might not happen again or it hasn't happened for 22 years. Live in the moment. Live in that sheer second of joy, being a realist, knowing that it may not come again. And that's why you should live in that moment, knowing that you've been through the trials and tribulations which make that moment even sweeter. But the truth is, we can't capture happiness in the same way that we can't capture misery. We think we can, but we can't. They're ethereal things. And the minute you try and catch them, it's like trying to catch smoke. And you spend so long trying to catch it, you miss that one moment where actually you have it. And I think you just have to understand that our emotions are ethereal and we should ride them out as they're there in front of us and in that moment. And know that just like happiness, misery does not have to be a lifelong thing. It isn't there. It isn't written that we have to feel that way every minute of every day. That, yes, I'm not denying, and I'm very lucky in the world that I live a relatively happy, secure life. But there are many out there that don't. Since I last spoke to you, I visited Ukraine in the middle of a war. And I remember feeling very strongly what I saw there was life-changing, and we might talk about it today. We might talk about it on another podcast. But I remember very clearly as I got on the train to leave Ukraine, Lviv, on the west side, to come back into Poland and therefore into relative safety, complete safety, really, thinking to myself, oh my God, I'm leaving this war today. I'm going home to my safe, secure environment. The people I've waved off at the platform are going back to waiting for an air raid, or waiting to hear news of a loved one and how whether they've survived on the front line, waiting to find out whether Russia's invasion would ultimately be successful or fail, and whether they'll maintain their freedom. All of those extraordinary things. So again, sometimes I think what we need to do is be aware of our own context, be aware of the context of the people around us, and use that to help us truly calibrate where we are, who we are, and how we feel.
Mm. As you say, Richard, I would love to do, because you reached out to me privately and sort of gave a brief insight about your experience in Ukraine, and I think it would be, yeah, it would be. Well, I'm not gonna put an adjective, but it would be very worthwhile to do a podcast, because I'd certainly, on a personal level, really love to tap into that energy and your experiences. Just to kind of wrap up the football analogy in Arsenal, Richard, when you were speaking there about that, being in the moment, there was, and I know you're from a certain age group that will resonate with the name, but a Northern Ireland and Arsenal goalkeeper by the name of Pat Jennings.
Also played for
Um,
Tottenham, but I don't hold that against him.
yeah, well, I was trying to keep that. I didn't want to bring that in, Richard, but anyway, you have, and that's fine. He was a goalkeeper of immense talent, and when I can remember the old match of the day with Jimmy Hill, interviewing him afterwards because he played out of his skin regularly, and Pat Jennings' response was, and it really speaks to what you've just been speaking about. I'm only as good as my last game.
Hmm.
And that's a way, Richard, of saying, I enjoyed it today, but next game, it kind of counts for nothing.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. By the way, I was lucky enough to meet him once as a child, Pat Jennings, and he had the biggest hands of any human being I have ever met before or since. They were like shovels. It was no wonder he was such a good goalkeeper. I have never met anyone with such huge hands. Charming man. But yeah, you're right. And I think that's exactly the point. There is no such thing as a pre-written destiny. We can redefine ourselves on an hourly, daily basis. We have the opportunity to change the course of our lives, and sometimes I think that can feel really hard for people, particularly people going through those real times of adversity where it feels like, and excuse the language, the shit is just constantly hitting the fan, right? Everything that we do seems to turn to dust or to misery. Everything we try seems to end in a dead end or failure. And of course, the truth is that what we're doing is we're heightened to looking for those things. I often say to people in a slightly different context, when they're on a train, because traveling on a train often makes me really sad, because when I'm sat on a train, what I see is people with their heads in their laptops and their phones and their tablets, working constantly, right? And I make a point when I sit on a train of looking out the window, because somewhere out there, the world's beautiful and interesting and unique, whether you're passing through an urban environment or a cityscape, whether you're passing through the beauty of the countryside. What you see outside is staggering. And every so often you'll see something which changes the way you see the world or think, or, that trip to Ukraine. I remember taking the train into Ukraine. And once we crossed the border, seeing some of those beautiful churches that Ukraine and even Russia are famous for, with the gold spires and just on that train coming into a war zone, thinking of all the misery, but at the same time looking out the window and just seeing something so incredibly beautiful created by human beings, and thinking, this is what human beings are capable of. In the midst of this destruction and hatred and warmongering and building missiles and drones, human beings are also capable of that. And I think sometimes we need to be cognizant and aware and alive and awake to the fact there is beautiness and happiness around us. And sometimes we have to have the courage to look for it, identify it, find it, and luxuriate in it, for no matter how short that moment may be.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to ask you a question now, Richard, by way of bringing this excellent dance to a close. And I'm going to be a little bit presumptuous and say it's such a big and personal question. I would venture you've never been asked this before. And boy, have you been asked some questions. But
Mainly by
anyway,
you, Paul, but yeah.
I'm flattered that I'm flattered. I'll take that accolade, Richard. I'll take that. Thank you. But the question is this, and we know humour is, or attempted humour on my part, is so powerful. Favourite rom-com, Richard? Favourite
Oh,
rom-com?
you're right. I have never been asked that question before. Favorite rom-com? Um, I love, for so many reasons, I love Love Actually, right? I love the Christmas rom-coms. I think partly because they're films that I've watched with my family and my children growing up, partly because Christmas is one of those times of year. I know for some people it's a horror show. For me, I've always loved Christmas. I love the thought of it. I love the memories of it. I love the anticipation of it. I love it because of the different story threads and the fact that actually a lot of Love Actually is not a happy film. It deals
Mhm.
with loss and it deals with sadness and it deals with unfulfilled potential and misery and the breakdown of relationships as much as it does about the relighting or new beginnings of relationships. And I think like any good comedy, it has light and dark and shade. And I love that about that film. So yeah, Love Actually, I think. And I love the music, which helps. And Bill Nye is one of my favorite actors of all time.
Brilliant. Okay. So, just by way of closure, then, Richard, how can people reach out, find out more about you, and tap into your immense experiences, wisdom?
Oh gosh, people can find me on LinkedIn. The blessing of my name is that I think I'm the only Richard Gerver with a V in the world. So LinkedIn, my website, which is richardgerver.com. I've got some books and stuff which you can get through the usual book stuff and a couple of LinkedIn learning courses. All of the info on that is on my website. And I promise people that if they take the time to reach out to me, I will personally connect back with them.
Richard, pleasure as always. And I think all that remains now is to sign off by, this beautiful dance was introduced by three words. And I'd like to sign it off, if I may, by using five words to say it's always a pleasure. In fact, to the extent that I feel it in my fingers.
Oh my God, Paul, you are both a braver man than me and a better singer than me. Thank you very much.